No, our forefathers did not willingly sell people to Europeans as slaves. But before you get into any foul-mouthed tirade with me, let me encapsulate the one-sided and stereotyped stories you have been told over the years. And for me to do so, let me try to use an illustration that you may understand. In the Disney movie The Lion King, Uncle Scar wants to become king. He leads his brother, King Mufasa, the real king, into a death trap. And he tells Simba, the heir to the throne, Mufasa's son, that it was Simba's fault that his father is dead. And he asks Simba to run away and never return. So he uses this lie to manipulate Simba and seize power for himself. Simba ran away, and the idea that he was responsible for the death of his father stuck in his head all his life. He never came back and fought. He didn't come back to fight for what belongs to him because he felt that guilt that he was responsible for the death of King Mufasa. And while he was in exile, Uncle Scar uses this same lie to manipulate his kingdom, and he took what belongs to Simba. Now tell me, does this story sound familiar? One of the most commonly held misconceptions about the transatlantic slave trade is that Africans willingly sold their own people to Europeans as slaves. However, this idea is completely false, and it has been used to justify the brutal and inhumane treatment of the African slaves, and it has been used for far too long to manipulate the African people that it was their fault that their brothers were sold into slavery. While it is true that some African kingdoms participated in the slave trade, it is important to understand that they didn't do so willingly. Now, European traders used various tactics, including violence, deception, manipulations, to coerce these African leaders into selling their own people. And the notion that Africans were somehow complicit in the slave trade ignores the fact that they themselves were also victims of colonization and exploitation. This was a story just to discredit them. So why do you think the way you do? I can help you with that. It's simple. It is because the dominant narratives about the slave trade and its impact on Africa and its people has been largely and primarily shaped and written by Europeans just to suit their narratives. It is this same narrative that has been told to you for centuries, for years, so that you will have this feel of guilt. We have this feeling of guilt. You won't have to put all the blames on the Europeans. And to those of you Africans and non-Africans who always say, but slavery or slave trade already existed in pre-colonial Africa. Oh, like Africans already had slaves. They already captured people. They bought slaves. They sold slaves. Blah, blah, blah. Please spare me the sanctimony. Yes, some African kingdoms participated in slavery. But it is also important, and I don't know why you don't want to understand, that the issue of slavery in the African context is different from that of the Europeans. The concept of slave trade or slavery in Africa wasn't based on ethnicity and race. It is a known fact that those slaves in Africa, they were not dehumanized. They were not maltreated the way the transatlantic slaves were. Most of these slaves, some of these slaves, in some cases, they even rose to power. Some of them even became prominent people in the societies. They were protected. They had rights, unlike the transatlantic slaves. So the impact and extent of the African slavery differed gigantously from the transatlantic slave trade in terms of scale, organization, and most importantly, its impact on the African society till today. So It is and it will be disingenuous for anyone to try to compare the two. So please, as we continue to learn and understand the history of the slave trade, it is crucial that we reject the false notion that Africans were willing participants of the exploitation of its people. Please, let's work instead towards a more just and equitable world. Let's stop the self-blaming. It is false.